Imagine stepping into a forest so vast, so endless, that every direction looks the same. The trees stand tall like an army of silent guardians, their trunks stretching skyward and their branches weaving a canopy that hides the sun. The ground beneath your feet is soft with leaves, and the air is heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. For most of us, this would feel like a maze, a place where losing your way is only a matter of time. But for Native Americans, these forests were not confusing at all. They were familiar, almost like walking through the hallways of a home. To them, every sound carried meaning. The distant rush of water hinted at a river. The call of certain birds revealed how deep they were in the woods. The position of moss on a tree or the way the wind moved through the branches was more than scenery. It was a compass, pointing them where they needed to go. What seemed invisible to outsiders was as clear as a map etched into the land itself. But it wasn't just skill or observation. For Native Americans, the forest was alive, filled with spirit and memory. Paths were remembered not as lines on a chart, but as stories, songs, and prayers passed down through generations. Walking through the wilderness was not wandering. It was connecting, retracing the steps of ancestors who had walked the same trails centuries before. And that's the mystery we explore today. Why Native Americans never got lost in endless forests. While others feared the wild, they trusted it. Where others saw confusion, they saw guidance. And perhaps in their footsteps lies a lesson we've forgotten. How to move through the world not as strangers, but as part of it. The forests of North America stretch farther than the eye could see. Millions of trees woven together in a living wall that seemed to have no beginning and no end. Imagine stepping into that world centuries ago, when there were no paved roads, no written signs, no compasses to point the way. To outsiders, it was overwhelming, a green ocean where one wrong turn could mean days of wandering. Yet for the people who called these lands home, the forest was not a threat. It was their protector, their provider, their familiar companion, shaped by generations of knowledge. But make no mistake, losing your way in such a wilderness could be deadly. Hunger waited for those who strayed too far from rivers and hunting grounds. Predators lurked in the shadows, silent and patient, watching from the underbrush. A sudden storm could twist the landscape, washing away footprints, bending branches, or covering paths in a blanket of fresh leaves. Even the bravest explorer from another land could find themselves circling endlessly, trapped in the sameness of towering trees. And yet Native Americans walked with certainty. To them, the forest was filled with signposts invisible to the untrained eye. A curve in a river, the slope of a hill, the way a certain tree leaned toward the sun, all of these were markers, guiding them like the lines of a hidden map. They did not separate themselves from nature. They lived inside it, weaving its rhythm into every step. So while others saw only confusion, they saw direction. Where strangers feared the unknown, Native Americans recognized the familiar. The endless forests were not walls meant to block them, but pathways meant to guide them. And as we step deeper into their world, we uncover how generations transformed what seemed like chaos into harmony, a harmony that allowed them to walk freely where others would surely be lost. When most people think of finding direction, they picture maps, compasses, or even the glowing blue dot of a modern phone. But for Native Americans, none of these tools existed. Instead, their compass was the living world around them. Every tree, every shadow, every sound was a clue, guiding them through endless forests with precision. What seemed like chaos to outsiders was, in truth, a code written into nature itself, a code they had mastered over centuries. The most obvious guide was the sun. At dawn, its rising glow painted the horizon in soft gold, pointing clearly to the east. At noon, its position overhead marked the center of the sky, and by sunset, its fiery descent revealed the west. For Native Americans, these simple observations were not casual glances. They were daily habits ingrained from childhood. Even in dense forests, where branches often blocked the sky, a shaft of light breaking through the canopy could offer direction, reminding them where they stood. But when the sun disappeared, the stars took over. The night sky was more than a blanket of light. It was a map. Tribes learned to trace the arc of the North Star, to follow the line of constellations like the Big Dipper or Orion's Belt. Each cluster of stars carried stories, myths, and lessons, so that children not only memorized their shapes, but understood their meaning. On journeys that stretched for days, the stars were trusted companions, shining faithfully above even when the forest below grew unfamiliar. Nature's compass also lived in the smallest details. Moss, for example, tended to grow thickest on the north side of trees, thriving where the shade lingered longest. The bend of a tree trunk, shaped by years of leaning towards sunlight, pointed like an arrow across the forest. Even the patterns of wind and weather became reliable signals. A soft breeze brushing consistently across the face could reveal direction as surely as a needle in a compass box. Yet it wasn't just the silent world of trees and stars. The forest spoke in sound. The call of birds, for example, revealed how far one had wandered. Migrating flocks carried knowledge of direction with them, their seasonal flights marking paths across the land. The rustle of a river carried faintly through the trees meant fresh water and a route that could be followed. Even the movements of animals hinted at safe passages. Deer trails etched into the undergrowth often led to water or open ground, and skilled trackers could read them like pathways carved by invisible hands. To sharpen these skills, children were trained from the moment they could walk. Elders would take them into the forest, pointing out the way sunlight filtered through branches or how shadows stretched differently throughout the day. They taught them to close their eyes and listen, to count the rhythm of a woodpecker's tapping, to notice how wind carried sound, to follow the chorus of frogs toward wetlands. These lessons were not written down, but spoken, repeated, and lived, until orientation became second nature. The result was a people who could walk vast distances without hesitation. Hunters followed subtle signs to track game across miles of wilderness. Scouts guided war parties through enemy territory without leaving a visible trace. Messengers carried warnings or news across entire regions, running by day and night, guided only by the world around them. Outsiders often marveled, asking how they could find their way so effortlessly. The answer was simple. They did not treat the forest as an obstacle. They treated it as a teacher. Even in moments when storms raged, when skies turned black and winds howled through the branches, Native Americans still trusted their compass. They knew how to wait, how to pause, how to read the earth again once calm returned. Patience was part of navigation, just as much as observation. A hurried traveler might panic in confusion, but a practiced one trusted that the signs would always return, written again in sunlight, in birdsong, or in the whisper of the wind. This intimate bond with nature was more than survival. It was philosophy. To walk in harmony with the land was to respect it, to listen to it, to remember that humans were not above it, but within it. The forest was not simply a backdrop. It was alive with guidance, waiting to be noticed. And because Native Americans carried this awareness in every step, they never truly lost their way. So while others stumbled blindly, depending on tools they could drop or lose, Native Americans carried their compass within them. Their eyes read the sky, their ears read the wind, their feet read the earth. Every journey was a conversation with nature, and every answer pointed them forward. Perhaps that is why, even in the deepest, darkest forests, they never felt lost, because the land itself was always speaking, and they had learned to listen. To navigate a forest, most of us would rely on signs that could be seen and touched, paths, streams, stars. But for Native Americans, direction was not only physical, it was also mental. They carried maps inside their memory, and those maps were drawn not with ink, but with stories, songs, and lived experience. The forest was not an unknown expanse to be measured. It was a familiar place, layered with meaning, where every bend and clearing held a name, a tale, or a lesson. Oral tradition was the foundation. Elders taught children to remember the land through narratives. A river might not just be a source of water, it was the place where a hero once crossed, or where a spirit animal left its mark. A massive oak was not just a tree, it was the grandfather who sheltered generations, a fixed point in stories told around fires. By tying locations to memory and myth, people carried entire landscapes in their minds, so vividly that even without markers they could retrace the steps of ancestors. This system of memory was strengthened through repetition. As children followed their parents through the woods, they were asked to recall landmarks on the way back. Where did the stream bend? Which stone was smooth? Which clearing smelled of pine? Step by step, they trained not just their eyes but their memory to hold the geography of their world. Long before written maps, these oral lessons created living atlases carried by every member of the community. Songs played a vital role too. Certain chants and rhythms were linked to trails, their verses acting like verbal coordinates. Singing while walking meant that direction was reinforced with sound, turning travel into a ritual of remembrance. A journey across the forest became more than moving through space. It became an act of storytelling in motion. Each mile was a verse, and each verse ensured the path remained alive in memory. Rituals also marked the land. Sacred sites, stones shaped like animals, trees twisted by wind, or unusual hills, were remembered not just as features, but as places of connection with the spirit world. By giving these places spiritual weight, Native Americans ensured they would never be forgotten. A hunter could pass by a hill and remember not only its shape, but also the story of the ancestor who dreamed there. Memory was never abstract. It was always tied to meaning. This mental mapping allowed astonishing feats. Messengers could run across vast forests with nothing but memory to guide them, recalling streams, ridges, and hidden glades with exact precision. Hunters tracked game for days without losing their bearings because every turn was anchored to remembered landmarks. Even during migrations, when entire communities moved, they could retrace ancient routes handed down from generation to generation. To outsiders, this seemed like magic, but it was the result of careful memory training embedded into everyday life. What made this system so resilient was its communal nature. Memory was not stored in one person. It was shared. Families, clans, and entire tribes contributed to a collective mental map of their land. When elders passed stories to the young, they passed directions too. If one person forgot, another could recall. The land was etched into community memory like a tapestry, woven tighter with each retelling. This also gave them resilience against change. When storms altered landscapes, when rivers flooded, or when fires cleared paths, memory adapted. New stories were created to mark new shapes. Oral tradition was flexible, allowing mental maps to evolve without losing their accuracy. Unlike paper maps that became outdated, memory maps remained alive, renewed with every walk, every hunt, every journey. So when Native Americans entered the forest, they were never alone. They walked not only with their own senses, but with the memory of ancestors, the voices of elders, and the stories of their people. The land was written into their minds, and because of that, they could always find their way home. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson. We often think of maps as objects outside of us, things we must carry in our hands. But for Native Americans, the truest maps were carried within, etched into memory, secured by story, strengthened by community. In this way, the forest was never just trees and rivers. It was living history, always remembered, always guiding, always present. For Native Americans, walking through the forest was never just a physical act. It was spiritual. Each step carried meaning, each path held memory, and every tree was alive with presence. To them, the forest was not an obstacle to cross. It was a living relative, a guardian, a teacher. This sense of connection transformed navigation into something deeper than survival. It became a sacred dialogue between people and the land. Before setting out on journeys, many tribes performed rituals. A hunter might place tobacco at the base of a tree, asking for guidance and safe passage. Travelers whispered prayers to the spirits of rivers and hills, believing that these forces could lead them through the wilderness. For outsiders, these rituals may have seemed like superstition, but for Native Americans, they were acts of respect, acknowledgments that the land was not empty, but alive, filled with voices ready to guide those who listen. The forest itself was viewed as a companion spirit. The rustle of leaves in the wind was not random noise. It was a whisper, a reminder to stay alert. The cry of an owl could signal direction, protection, or even warning. The sudden appearance of a deer on the path could be read as an omen, sometimes an invitation to follow, sometimes a caution to wait. In this way, navigation was never separate from belief. To walk through the woods meant to be in constant conversation with the unseen, trusting that guidance would arrive through signs, sounds, and intuition. Dreams were also part of the compass. Many believed that visions given in sleep offered maps of the world. A dream of a particular mountain or stream could later reveal itself on a journey, assuring the traveler that they were on the right path. Shamans and spiritual leaders interpreted such dreams, weaving them into the collective knowledge of the tribe. In this way, direction was not only observed in nature, but also revealed through the spirit world. Ceremonies gave these beliefs form. Before a hunt or migration, groups gathered to dance, sing, and offer smoke to the sky. These acts were more than ritual. They were a way of aligning human footsteps with the rhythm of the earth. A runner might whisper chants under his breath, each word a step of protection. Groups moving together sometimes sang as they walked, believing that their voices harmonized with the forest, making the path safer. The journey became sacred, not just a movement across space, but an alignment of spirit, body, and earth. Sacred sites reinforce this connection. A particular rock formation or grove of trees was not just a landmark, it was a place where the spirit world touched the physical. Travelers would pause there, offering thanks, renewing their sense of direction, and drawing strength from the presence of ancestors. Some sites were teaching grounds where young people were taken to learn humility and reverence, ensuring that the next generation would never walk blindly through the land, but always with respect. These places acted as both physical waypoints and spiritual anchors, ensuring no path ever felt unfamiliar. This spiritual compass made fear less powerful. Where outsiders felt dread at being lost in endless woods, Native Americans felt presence. They trusted the land to guide them because they trusted the spirits within it. Even in moments of uncertainty, there was faith that guidance would come through a dream, an animal call, or the sudden clarity of intuition. To be lost physically did not mean being lost spiritually, and that assurance gave them the courage to keep moving forward. Generations carried this way of walking, teaching children not only how to read moss and stars, but also how to listen with the heart. The land speaks, elders would say. If you honor it, it will never abandon you. Thus, navigation was not about control but relationship. The forest was not conquered but befriended. To see the world in this way meant that every shadow held meaning, and every trail was lit by more than daylight. It was lit by trust. And perhaps that is the most powerful reason Native Americans never felt lost. They did not walk alone. Every path was shared with ancestors, spirits, and the sacred presence of the natural world. To them, direction was not drawn by a compass needle, but carried in trust, in the land, in the stories, and in the invisible hands that always pointed the way. If memory and spirit shaped the compass of Native Americans, then training and community gave it strength. Navigation was not left to chance or to a few skilled individuals. It was a shared responsibility, woven into daily life from childhood to adulthood. No one was left unprepared because survival depended on every member knowing how to move through the forest without fear. From the earliest years, children were introduced to the rhythms of the land. Elders took them on short walks, asking them to remember which trees leaned toward the river or which clearings smelled of pine needles after rain. Games were created where children were blindfolded and asked to find their way back using only the sound of running water or the calls of birds. What seemed like play was in fact training, sharpening their senses until they became natural tools of orientation. As children grew, their lessons became more demanding. Young boys who would one day become hunters were challenged to follow trails left by deer or elk, reading broken twigs and bent grass like a language. Young girls, often responsible for gathering, learned how to identify useful plants by their habitat and to find their way home with full baskets even when paths grew overgrown. Every task of daily life contained lessons in direction, embedding navigation into the fabric of survival. Scouts held a special role in many tribes. They were chosen for their sharp eyes, endurance, and memory. These young men trained rigorously, learning to move silently through the forest while memorizing every bend, stream, and ridge. Scouts were the ones who guided hunting parties, warned of danger, and led migrations safely. Their skill was not only physical, but mental, for they carried entire landscapes in their minds, ensuring their people never wandered blindly. Runners formed another vital group. Trained from youth, they built endurance through daily sprints and long-distance journeys. A runner might be asked to deliver a message across miles of forest, through unfamiliar terrain and still arrive without hesitation. They practiced by racing each other, by carrying small burdens while running, and by retracing trails at night to sharpen their memory. Endurance and orientation blended until running itself became a language of connection across tribes and territories. But training was never solitary. Navigation was a communal art. Families walked together, sharing stories of the land as they traveled. Elders corrected mistakes gently, turning wrong turns into lessons. Women passed down knowledge of berry groves, medicinal plants, and safe routes to streams. Hunters taught children how to read the silence of the forest, when it was calm, when it was alert, and what that meant for direction. Each member of the tribe carried a piece of the map, and together they formed a living atlas of their homeland. Ceremonies reinforced this bond. Before long journeys, the community gathered to remind travelers that they did not walk alone. Songs invoked ancestral guidance, dances honored the spirits of the land, and blessings reminded everyone that direction came not only from observation, but from unity. The path ahead was seen as a shared journey, even when only a few walked it. This communal reinforcement gave strength to every individual who set out into the forest. By adulthood, orientation was second nature. A young man sent to hunt could find his way home after days in the wilderness. A woman gathering roots could return with confidence, no matter how winding the trails. Messengers carried words across territories without pause. Scouts and warriors guided their people with assurance. None of this came suddenly. It was the result of years of layered teaching, of community shaping every step. Outsiders often marveled at how entire groups could move together through forests without confusion. But the secret was simple. No one was left untrained. Navigation was not the skill of a few experts, but the inheritance of all. By embedding it into games, rituals, daily work, and communal memory, Native Americans ensured their people never walked blindly. And so, the forest was never frightening. To Native Americans, it was a place of learning, a place of practice, and ultimately, a place of belonging. Every child grew up knowing they were not just travelers in the woods, but caretakers of a shared knowledge. That is why they could move with such confidence. They were guided not only by nature, but by the community that had prepared them to see the land as home. If memory, spirit, and training shaped the way Native Americans moved through forests, practical survival skills ensured they never lost their way. These were the small, clever techniques, simple to learn, but powerful in practice, that made the difference between wandering blindly and walking with certainty. The forest was vast, yet they filled it with signposts of their own making. One of the simplest methods was trail marking. Travelers bent branches at angles so that others could see the direction of movement. Small piles of stones, carefully stacked, were left at crossroads or beside streams. Sometimes the bark of a tree was carved with subtle signs, invisible to outsiders but instantly recognizable to those who knew the code. These markers did not disturb the land but blended with it, practical reminders hidden in plain sight. Seasonal migration routes were another layer of survival. Tribes did not move at random. They followed patterns written by generations before them. South in winter for shelter, north in summer for hunting, and always near rivers that gave food and water. The land itself became a calendar, and by following it, they avoided confusion. These routes were memorized by scouts, reinforced by rituals, and passed down like inheritance, ensuring the tribe moved as one body across the seasons. For hunters, the forest itself was a network of paths. They followed animal trails that cut through underbrush and led toward water or open clearings. Deer, elk, and bison created natural highways, and trackers read them like books. Broken branches, crushed leaves, or even the faint smell of animals left in the wind told hunters which direction to follow. Outsiders might see chaos, but Native Americans saw order, a hidden map drawn by the movement of wildlife. Water was another compass. The sound of rushing rivers carried across miles, guiding travelers toward streams that could be followed safely. Knowing that rivers always flowed downhill, they used water to orient themselves, finding valleys, basins, and open plains beyond the trees. Small creeks connected to larger rivers, and those rivers connected to sacred lakes or known camps. By following water, they could cross unfamiliar forests with assurance. Fire, too, had its role. In some regions, small controlled burns were used to clear undergrowth and create paths. These fire lanes not only made hunting easier, but also acted as corridors through dense woods. Generations knew where burned areas would open, and these became predictable markers in the wild. Fire was both tool and guide, transforming thick wilderness into passageways that could be remembered for decades. At night, survival relied on subtle awareness. Without stars visible through stormy skies, travelers used their ears. The steady chorus of frogs revealed wetlands. The rhythm of crickets suggested open grassland nearby. Even silence was meaningful. When the forest grew unnaturally still, it often meant predators were close, urging travelers to slow down or change direction. By reading the sounds of the night, they turned uncertainty into orientation. Snow brought new challenges, but techniques adapted. Footsteps were carefully placed in patterns so that groups could retrace their own path home. Hunters read the tracks of animals in snow, following them not only for food but also for safe passage through winter terrain. Snowdrifts revealed where wind had blown longest, a clue to direction. Even in frozen silence, the land spoke, and those who listened always found their way. These survival methods were more than tricks. They were proof of harmony with the land. Each technique was practical but also respectful, shaping paths without destroying them. Bent branches, stone piles, burned corridors, animal trails, all were temporary guides disappearing back into the forest once their purpose was served. The land was never scarred, only marked gently, as if leaving whispers for those who came after. And that was the genius of it. Native Americans could walk through endless forests not only because of memory and spirit, but because of these practical techniques. Outsiders might lose their way within hours, but Native Americans carried a complete system: eyes that read trails, ears that followed rivers, hands that left subtle markers, and feet that trusted the paths of animals. With this layered knowledge, they walked confidently, turning wilderness into a home filled with signs, guidance, and direction. Among the most extraordinary demonstrations of Native American skill in the forest were the endurance journeys that became the heart of both survival and legend. To outsiders, these feats seemed almost impossible. Yet within Native communities, they were proof of discipline, training, and a bond with the land that allowed people to go farther and longer than anyone else imagined. Messengers were often chosen from youth, trained to run across forests for hours without stopping. They carried news of danger, peace, or celebration between villages separated by mountains, rivers, and endless trees. Without maps or roads, they relied on their sharpened senses and memory, guided by rivers, stars, and trails only they could read. Some accounts speak of runners covering distances of over 100 miles in a single stretch, moving through day and night until their message was delivered. Their speed was not in sprinting, but in endurance, steady and unbroken. Hunters, too, displayed remarkable stamina. When pursuing game, they did not always rely on traps or quick strikes. Instead, they used persistence, chasing deer for hours, sometimes days, until the animal tired. This persistence hunting required both physical strength and an unshakable sense of direction. To follow a deer across valleys and hills, through streams and thick brush, meant never losing awareness of the land. It was a test of both body and navigation, and success was celebrated as much for wisdom as for skill. Stories of legendary trackers and guides passed through generations. There were tales of men who could follow a single broken twig across miles of forest, of women who led entire groups safely through storms by recognizing faint trails, of scouts who seemed to vanish into the woods and reappear with perfect knowledge of where the enemy was. Some were remembered as almost supernatural, their abilities so refined that even animals seemed to trust them. But these feats were never seen as individual glory. They were always tied to service for the community. A runner's strength was valued because it carried warnings that saved lives. A hunter's stamina fed families. A scout's memory protected the tribe from danger. Their endurance was not about proving power, it was about proving responsibility. And so, endurance journeys became both history and legend. They taught that strength was not in rushing, but in patience. Not in force, but in balance with the land. For Native Americans, to travel far without losing one's way was not just skill, it was identity. Each step was a promise that they belonged to the forest, and the forest in turn would never abandon them. The forests of North America were vast, stretching endlessly in every direction, To outsiders, they were confusing, dangerous, even frightening. Yet to Native Americans, they were not mazes to escape, but homes to embrace. Every tree carried a lesson, every river a direction, every star a reminder of connection. What seemed impossible to others, traveling without getting lost, was second nature to them, because they did not walk as strangers, they walked as family within the land. Their knowledge came from many layers, from observation of sun, stars, moss, and animals, from memory carried through stories and songs, from rituals that honored the spirits of rivers and hills, from training that began in childhood and never truly ended, from practical techniques that bent branches, stacked stones, and followed rivers, and from endurance that turned journeys into living legends. Together, these created a compass more powerful than any tool because it was alive within them. But perhaps the most important truth was this: they never saw the forest as an enemy. To be lost means to be disconnected, to stand apart from what surrounds you. Native Americans never carried that disconnection. The forest was guide, protector, ancestor, and teacher. Even in the darkest nights or fiercest storms, they trusted that the land would not abandon them, because they had never abandoned the land. Today, their footsteps still echo. We may rely on phones, satellites, and maps, but beneath it all, the wisdom remains timeless. Pay attention, move with patience, listen to the world around you. To walk with respect is to never truly be lost. So when we ask, why did Native Americans never get lost in endless forests? The answer is simple yet profound. They belonged, and belonging is the truest compass of all.